Right in between, we are the 40s. Now, why is that? Well, that's where we have the band of thickest clouds, and that's where we've had the rainfall. How much rainfall we had over the past 24 hours? We had 1.6 inches of rain.
Important witness to testify over the course of this trial, now meeting Flippin County medical examiner. So again, we have some clues as to what's to come, no specifics yet, but again, we are making good progress into what could be the final phase for the prosecution.
All right, guys, thank you very, very much. Just ahead, I'll speak with the lead lawyer for the George Floyd family about the show strategy that keeps circling back to Floyd's drug use. Ben Crump is standing by live. Also, Congressman Matt Gaetz is now under federal investigation. We're learning more about a pardon he apparently sought from President Trump while he was still in the White House.
Extra mile, and they do the job.
Call makes them happy. It's designed to get more families access to the pavilion. To make that happen, Mud Mile will pay 50 family memberships for a full year. Recipient families will be selected through a nomination process. Mud Mile
$1 billion since the plan was signed into law less than a month ago. The largest block of these latest payments went to Social Security beneficiaries who didn't file a 2020 or 2019 tax return and didn't use the non-filer
vaccination, and strengthening the capacity of healthcare professionals to have empathy.
And Doug.
Liberty Mutual customizes your car insurance.
Figure out what his next strategy is then.
And Ari, I just answer that.
Professor
that's
Greer,
exactly right.
Yeah, Michael, I have a little bit of housekeeping, which is Professor Greer, I have to give her credit. 13 minutes into the program, and she's the first person to get us to game theory. Okay? It wasn't you, Michael, as talented a lawyer as you are. I'm just saying.
.com and get 50%.
In your mind, Michael, and also tell us what we should expect in the coming weeks and months, because if this ends in a case with no charges against Gaetz, we'll be the first to report it. We're just tracking the evidence as it emerges, or what else might be expected. You get the last word in this segment, sir.
So following on the professor's comment, Greenberg holds the power. He's the one who, if there is charges to be brought against Gaetz or any other members of Congress, he's going to be the one who knows it. He's going to be the one who can flip the switch, protect himself, dime out the others, and then let them fend for themselves. Because nobody else can do that as easily as Greenberg.
Did you receive a report that he had received CPR from any of the officers who may have been on the scene on May 25th?
No.
Welcome back to Breaking News, our coverage of the Derek Chauvin trial. Up next, I want you to listen to testimony from the use of force expert, Jody Stiger. He testified that the use of force was lethal, and that when George Floyd was on the ground and handcuffed, the restraint should have stopped. Here's that.
I believe the defendant's left knee is on Mr. Floyd's neck and his right knee is on his back area.
Right. If you could use the stylus and place a circle around the left knee of the defendant. And now on the right knee of the defendant. Okay. Now, based on your review, does this show the relative position of the defendant's knees during the entirety of the restraint period?
Yes.
You can take that down. And now the middle photo is consistent with Exhibit 17, which you've already reviewed. But again, you see the positioning from a different angle of the defendant's left knee. Is that correct?
Yes.
And can you note anything specific about the position of his feet?
His feet are spread apart and on the ground.
Based on your experience and training, where would the majority of the defendant's body weight be given the position of the left knee, the right knee, and the feet?
That would be on his knees and pushing down from his knee area from his body. The handcuffs were not double locked. Double locked meaning that they could continue to ratchet tighter as the person moved.
Were you able to hear instances of what you recognize to be ratcheting during your review with body-worn cameras?
Yes.
Right. So in the principle of pain compliance, if I'm to understand your testimony, you would inflict pain for the purpose of having the subject obey your command?
Yes, comply.
What if there's no opportunity for compliance?
Then at that point, it's just pain.
You again observed the entirety of the body-worn camera footage. Did you see whether the defendant discontinued the use of this pain compliance technique during the restraint period that you've defined?
Yes, I did, and no, he did not.
Do you have an opinion to a degree of reasonable professional certainty whether the force used, as shown in Exhibit 254, whether that force being applied then for the restraint period, which you've defined as 9 minutes and 29 seconds, would constitute deadly force?
Yes.
And what is that opinion?
That it would.
Why is that?
Because at the time of the restraint period, Mr. Floyd was not resisting. He was in the prone position. He was handcuffed. He was not attempting to evade. He was not attempting to resist. And the pressure that was being caused by the body weight could cause positional asphyxia, which could cause death.
You concluded that this was an excessive use of force, right?
Yes.
That's not the standard, is it? The question is whether it is an objectively reasonable use of force, right?
Correct.
Now, when we review an authorized, or whether a use of force is authorized, there are sort of layers to that analysis. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
You understand that what an officer is supposed to do is kind of go through this cycle process, taking in information, right?
Yes.
Assessing the risk, the threat, deciding is it lawful for me to do this, how do I react, ultimately with the goal of keeping everybody safe, right?
Yes, that's a pretty standard thing to continually reassess as you are using force.
Right. Reassessment is a specific tool.
Yes.
And that's common to police officers, right?
Yes, sir. No, I couldn't make it out.
Does he sound like he says, I hate too many drugs? Listen again.
I can't make that out, no.
So in the chaos of a situation, things can be missed, right?
Yes.
Sir, you were shown some training materials that included photographs of officers in positions in which they would have their legs on the subject's back and the base of the neck. Is that right?
Yes.
And in the photograph you were shown that subject was not yet handcuffed, was he?
No, he was not.
And the purpose of situating oneself on a subject is to gain control in order to handcuff the individual.
Yes.
And what is the officer supposed to do after they handcuff the individual?
Immediately sit the person up or put him in a side recovery position.
Still to come, the officer's body cam footage front and center in the courtroom as the lead investigator in the case breaks down the timeline. You'll also hear about his testimony about whether Derek Chauvin's knee appears to be on George Floyd's back or on his neck.
For reasonable doubt to come in. Oh, I didn't hear from this particular officer that actually was there training him. I didn't hear this. So they're ensuring that their case in chief is as solid as it can be.
Civil rights attorney Shauna Lloyd, thank you for your analysis tonight. I appreciate it. I want to tell everyone what we have coming up because it's a big one. Mitch McConnell looking cornered. He's jammed by his own Republican voters as Biden flexes. This is our special report we've been working on. I'm going to explain next.
Seen blood when you brought low. They really were a burden, and they should be kept to a minimum. Number two, you should have a say in the taxes you actually pay. This notion of taxation from afar, the King of England, that wasn't going to fly anymore.
Well, I think there's a sense that Americans don't want to be over.
The ACOG, the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecologists, the CDC has recommended
coffee mini biscuits. But if you
tomorrow can confirm that and anything you can preview?
I don't have anything to preview. I can convey that I expect the president will have more to say tomorrow.
And will it involve ghost guns, potential extended background checks on ghost guns?
I'm just not going to preview more from here. I expect we'll have more. We'll probably do a background briefing call for all of you later today.
Okay, just to follow up on something Secretary Raimondo said. She was very clear that there is room to compromise on increasing the corporate tax rate to 28%. As you know, Senator Manchin is saying he wants it to be as low as 25%. Is there a scenario where the president would go that low?
Well, look, here are principles. Debate is inevitable. Compromise is inevitable. Changes are certain. And our main bottom line is inaction is not an option. And so we see it as a positive that Senator Manchin, that others, Republican members, other Democrats have come forward and said, I like these pieces, I propose a different component on the tax piece. We're happy to have that discussion. And what we are seeing, though, is broad agreement about the need to invest in and modernize our infrastructure.
Could you get everything you wanted in the bill at 25%?
Well, just like any discussion or negotiation, there's lots of factors. It's like a Rubik's Cube. I don't know if that's the right analogy, but if you are proposing a lower tax rate, then you have to make some decisions.
What would you compromise on that?
We're going to have those discussions with members of Congress. I expect the president will welcome members of both parties.
Priced at around $400 and $500. Those phones will also be available starting this week. You no longer need headphones or risk annoying everyone around you when you watch TikTok videos. The company has launched automatic captions. Creators now have the ability to add automatically generated captions to their videos after they are uploaded. Viewers can select if they want to see the captions when they play those.
A walk in the park. If I...
Thunder mainly east of I-29 tonight. Then tomorrow, rain, Sioux Falls. We can look at some inch type amounts along and east of I-29, especially like around Sioux Falls and places like that. And then western South Dakota will have sunshine, so they'll be much warmer in the 60s. On Friday, partly cloudy, windy, the upper 50s to the low 60s, so we're starting to warm up. And then the weekend, Sioux Falls, mostly sunny, 59 Saturday, a breezy 61 on Sunday. Cooler air comes in next week. For the Aberdeen area, mostly sunny, 61 Saturday, breezy 59 on Sunday, and the low 50s is cooler.
Anna, and enter your license plate.
Just use the code on your screen. Your new normal?
Contention, so they will not be in the Summer League tournament in South Dakota State.
Here in November, and
Win over North Dakota State here in the Shack.
is his wheelhouse. Also first in par 4 scoring, top 10 in par.
It's how Walmart makes it easy.
Buying your first home is the start of realizing bigger dreams with your family. That's why it's important to protect.
There's a cute
My phone, and there's my glucose number.
30 seconds. Good luck.
Auto, business, life.
We are Trusted Choice, independent insurance agents in your hometown.
To find a trusted choice agent in your area, visit.
You guys had this report before taking office. Why were steps not taken sooner regarding that facility?
Well, first let me say that the facility is not approved by the FDA. That's in fact the process working, and the FDA is taking a look at whether...
Carolyn Moyer, the American College of Physicians, Deborah Ness, the National Partnership.
Deal. Do you?
Very well represented by their party's reflexive opposition in Washington, as more Republican voters lean towards Biden policies, at least in these first 70 days. Which raises an important prospect. Could Biden...
Okay, so the record should reflect that right now we're at 2019-17, that's good. And Agent Ryerson, at this moment in Exhibit 127, is this the approximate moments when Mr. Floyd is placed prone on the ground?
Yes, it is, sir.
And when this happens, around this time period, I'm going to let this run for about 10 seconds, okay?
Yes, sir.
Now, looking at that 10-second portion, were you able to determine approximately where Mr. Chauvin's left knee is?
Yes, sir. It appears as though it's on the back of Mr. Floyd's neck.
And are you able to determine where Mr. Chauvin's right knee is?
It appears as though it was on Mr. Floyd's back.
Right here at 2019-28, the hand is sort of in the center of the photograph. That Officer Chauvin's hand?
Yes, sir.
Okay, wearing a glove?
Yes, sir.
In the videos you have reviewed, was he wearing gloves on both hands?
Yes, sir.
Now I'm going to just speed up to 20-20-45. So the records reflect we've actually stopped at 20-20-44. That's good. I'm going to let this just run for 10 seconds, okay?
Yes, sir.
My face getting up bad.
Now, here at 20-20-55 for the record, we see another video portion within this video, correct?
Yes, sir.
So the right hand, as you're looking at it, the right side of the screen is now Darnell Frazier's video, correct?
Yes, sir.
So this is what you meant earlier when we talked about a composite video.
Correct.
Is there a time during the Darnell Frazier video that it becomes apparent Mr. Floyd stops verbalizing?
Yes.
We're saying words.
Yes, sir.
And that approximately, well, if we could then go to 20-23-59. All right, so we're at 23:58, and I ask that you play this for about 10 seconds again.
Bro, but you can get him off the ground. You're being a bum right now. You can get him off the ground, bro. You can get him off the ground. You're being a bum right now.
All right, so is this the moment in the encounter between Mr. Floyd and Mr. Chauvin when Mr. Floyd appears to stop making verbal sounds, talking?
Yes, sir.
Concerning news tonight, a more contagious variant of coronavirus is now the most dominant strain here in the U.S., causing a surge of new cases, especially for young Americans. COVID-19 infecting more 12 to 17-year-olds than older Americans. Are youth sports to blame? Plus, we'll tell you the 5 states where nearly half of all new COVID cases are coming from. A COVID vaccine pill? Could an oral medication replace the needle and be a game changer? And more troubles for AstraZeneca tonight. The possible link between that shot and blood clots. Plus, why did hundreds of people wait hours in line at this vaccination site just to be turned away? Vaccine passports, the new COVID flashpoint. Some sports venues, cruise lines, and colleges see proof of a vaccine as the key to getting back to normal faster. What about the legal and privacy concerns? How fast was Tiger Woods driving? Police say the legendary golfer lost control of his luxury SUV while speeding, with his foot on the gas, not the brake, as he crashed his car. Gates under fire. CBS News investigates the Republican congressman's relationship with a political donor and the Bahamas trip they took with female escorts. Plus the blanket pardon that Congressman Gates requested from the Trump White House. The border crisis. Is climate change forcing Central Americans to flee to the U.S.? And when Congress is out, the doctor is in. The lawmaker saving lives in his spare time.
This is the CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell, reporting from the nation's capital.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. We're going to begin tonight with a disturbing setback in the fight against the pandemic. A highly contagious variant of the virus has now taken hold right here in the U.S., and it may be what's causing this surge of new infections, especially in children. Tonight, the CDC is saying that the UK variant of the virus, which is 50% more transmissible than the original strain, is now dominant across this country. And that is leading to increases in new cases and hospitalizations in young adults, even as more and more older Americans are getting vaccinated. Now,
out and corroborate, verify, and all of that would make the case against Matt Gaetz or anyone else much stronger.
Because if he were to, let's say, plead guilty and fully cooperate, that would be a nightmare scenario, potentially, for the congressman, right?
Fully vaccinated people do not. We've got a breaking news alert here at 5:32. We've just learned that the South Dakota Supreme Court will take up the case of recreational marijuana. The court will hear arguments in the case on April 28th at 10 in the morning in Pierre. Amendment A is the ballot issue to legalize recreational marijuana in the state. It was approved by voters in November. Governor Noem directed law enforcement officials to file a lawsuit against the amendment, claiming it is unconstitutional. Backers for Amendment A appealed that decision to the South Dakota Supreme Court.
We bring in meteorologist Tyler Roney for a check for our first alert forecast. Tyler, lots of rain, but we definitely need that with some drier conditions seem to dominate the future.
Yeah, Sam, I mean, really, it's been so dry, before this week specifically. We really haven't had a lot of rain chances, so this is nice that we're finally seeing that. And we're going to break from it for now and soon.
Delivery of credible and community.
The Guard Corps is attacked. Iran is not saying who staged the assault. The ship has been anchored for years in the Red Sea off Yemen.
A big spike to 49%. Republicans, meanwhile, are down to 40%. Well, even after Reagan left office, his political realignment lived on.
You get fast 24-hour relief in one drop.
Vaccine tonight at a strip.
Don't leave me, Mom. Just stay with me.
But Zamaya's condition rapidly deteriorating. The high school junior passing away from complications from the virus. Her mother tonight with a warning for other parents.
This is not over. This virus is killing. No age to it, no race to it, nothing. It don't care.
More vaccines are starting to reach younger Americans. 38 states opening vaccinations for everyone 16 and older.
I actually was tagged in a post that someone shared on Instagram, so I just quickly hopped on it because it's very hard to find appointments.
Those vaccines believed to work against the variants. And tonight, more evidence protection from vaccines will last. New data shows high levels of antibodies at least 6 months out from the Moderna vaccine.
Antibodies delivered by vaccination persist at least through 6 months, and likely from the shape of the curve well beyond that.
And more than 6 months into its study, Pfizer also reporting its vaccine is highly effective.
That was good news as well, but specifically on antibodies, promising news on the Moderna vaccine, those antibodies. Dr. Fauci today saying that he believes that we're going to see this in all three vaccines. And we should point out that this is still very early. The lasting effects could actually be even longer with.
David, that's right. Dr. Fauci was specifically talking about the promising new data from the Moderna vaccine at that moment, but he went on to say that he expects other vaccines like Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson will offer similar results, and that 6-month timeline is all they've been able to study so far. He also thinks that protection will last longer. David?
All right, with Johnson leading us off tonight with thank you. We turn next tonight to the Tiger Woods crash. Tonight, authorities say he was going up to hour at the time of the crash, in fact hitting the tree at 75 miles per hour, saying speed was the cause of the crash and that there will be no charges. Also saying there was no special treatment in this case. Here's our chief national correspondent, Matt Duffin from California tonight.
Tonight, 6 weeks after that crash nearly sheared off the front of Tiger Woods' car, the LA Sheriff's Department concluding speed alone caused the wreck.
The primary causal factor for this traffic collision was driving at a speed unsafe for the road conditions and the inability to negotiate the curve of the roadway.
He was going up to 87 miles per hour, nearly twice the 45 mile per hour speed limit. And according to the investigation, the car's so-called black box shows that instead of slamming on the brakes, Woods hit the gas.
It is speculated and believed that Tiger Woods inadvertently hit the accelerator instead of the brake pedal.
This aerial image showing the collision points as his car went rocketing over a median, across a road, through brush, and then crashing into a tree at 75 miles per hour. But the car still had momentum.
The impact of the vehicle when it hit the tree caused the vehicle to go airborne and do a somewhat pirouette, landing on its side.
Police say Woods' driving was unsafe, but not reckless and not under the influence.
There were no open containers in the vehicle, and there were no narcotics or any evidence of medication in the vehicle or on his person.
Authorities say he won't even be cited for speeding because there were no witnesses to the accident. The sheriff...
That's their point there. So many of our viewers were debating that. Our panel has been discussing as well, so let's welcome everyone back. And I'll start with Darren Porcher on this. Darren, what do you hear, and how important is this point to you?
Well, I think that this is a very significant point because we're hearing different perspectives from the different experts that are testifying on the stand. That being said, it brings forth a level of doubt from the defense perspective, and I think this elevates the case for the defense in connection with what George Floyd said, and as it relates to ingesting drugs or ingesting too much drugs, so to speak.
What do you hear? Do you hear I ate too many drugs or I ain't do no drugs? Did you hear something clearly there?
I hear I ate too many drugs.
Okay.
That's what I hear. But you also have to take in consideration, we're hearing a recording. But when you're experiencing things in the heat of the moment, you have a more focused understanding as to what's being said. That being said, as a police officer on the scene, they would have understood what George Floyd mentioned in connection with this statement.
All right. Bob Bianchi, what do you hear, and how impactful is this to the case?
I hear many drugs, and so to me, that fits into the narrative of the defense that I ate too many drugs. And in fact, we know he did ingest drugs, so that's consistent. There's drugs found inside the vehicle. What was really bad, Mike, is that the prosecutor's got to bring the guy back to say, oh, now I really listened to it with a little more of the context of it. Now I understand the words differently. I don't think it was a good look, Mike, and I think that fits right into the defense narrative, especially coming off the use of force expert, where the defense got a lot of very good information, especially, Mike, no injury to the neck, either externally or internally. That is what the autopsy is going to show. It was on the shoulders and it was on the back, and that is something that was compliant with their policy at the time. Not anymore, but we only judge him at the time. That's why this goes from the prosecution slipping out of their hands on second and third degree murder, but they could get the manslaughter at this point in time because that doesn't require an intent to harm Mr. Floyd. It requires recklessness. And to your point that you made the other day with me, Mike, that's where not calling quick enough for the emergency services may be the thing the jury hooks themselves on to say that was reckless manslaughter.
Got it. Hey, Ariva, back to what George Floyd may have said, may not have said. Is this the kind of thing, number one, a jury debates when it's time to deliberate?
I think the jury will debate it. It's unfortunate, Mike, that that prosecution witness didn't ask for additional, audio so that he could make a response that was consistent with what he heard. I will agree with Bob. I don't like the fact that he had to change his testimony, but here's the deal here. We know often in these cases there is an effort on the part of the defense to demonize the victim. We've seen it played out in so many other cases. It's going to be played out. It's already started in this case. This whole notion that Mr. Floyd is somehow a bad person, attack his character because he has a drug addiction. The prosecution knew it was coming. The judge has even spoken to it in that motion where they limit the testimony that can be brought in from that 2019 incident. Part of what the judge says is, I'm not going to allow you to bring in testimony that's going to paint Mr. Floyd as this bad person, that's a character assassination that allows people, the jurors, to make some kind of determination about the case based on what they think about Mr. Floyd and his drug use. So yes, it's going to be debated, but I think the prosecution just has to keep reminding the jurors, this is not about what Mr. Floyd did. This is about what Derek Chauvin did. Mr. Floyd is a victim. He is dead. He lost his life because this defendant leaned on his body for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. If they keep hitting home on that, I think the prosecution is going to be fine.
Right, because the defense wants to keep bringing up drugs because their case is that is the real substantial factor that caused George Floyd's death. All right, another topic is the defense saying that this angry crowd affected Derek Chauvin's behavior. Will the jury buy it?
New tattoo studio brow pencil from Maybelline.
Orlando Answer Associates.
The federal probe tells CBS News Pierazzolo and Gates traveled to the Bahamas in late 2018 or early 2019, and Pierazzolo paid for travel expenses, accommodations, and female escorts. One key question for investigators: were the women illegally trafficked across state or international lines for the purposes of sex with the congressman?
Traveling across state lines is what creates a federal hook for a prosecution.
Does it matter whether he paid them or not?
It doesn't matter that he personally paid them, as long as he knows someone is doing that.
Investigators also want to know if Gates was accepting paid escorts in exchange for political access or legislative favors. In a 2018 podcast, Pierazzolo highlighted Gates' push for legislation expanding federal cannabis research, something that could have been a boon to Pierazzolo and other marijuana merchants.
In fact, Congressman Matt Gaetz is in the process of working on legislation up in Washington, D.C. that will help facilitate research on a nationwide level, and we should see a lot of good benefit from that.
Gates introduced the cannabis bill twice, but it never came to a vote.
If there's evidence of a quid pro quo that the congressman was provided with benefits in return for him sponsoring some legislation that's of interest to the donor, that's a federal crime.
Pierazzolo did not respond to our repeated attempts to contact him.
Dr. Pierazzolo?
So we met this morning outside his Orlando office.
Did you pay for escorts for Congressman Matt Gaetz? Can you tell us about your relationship with Matt Gaetz?
He told us no comment. A conservative activist now authorized to speak on behalf of Gates told CBS News in part, quote, Representative Gates has never paid for sex, nor has he had sex with an underage girl. What began with blaring headlines about sex trafficking has now turned into a general fishing exercise about vacations and consensual relationships with adults. The Justice Department, Nora, declined to comment on our new report.
Major Garrett with all that new information. Thank you. We want to turn now to the border crisis. Tonight, more than 20,000 unaccompanied minors are in U.S. custody. And it's not just children arriving. Border Patrol just posted this picture of 130 people arrested in Arizona. Most are from Central America, where conditions are desperate. CBS.
Yet another vaccine, specifically we're talking about that AstraZeneca vaccine, even if the FDA were to deem it to be very good, which they haven't done yet, it hasn't even come before the FDA, at least not yet. Why is that the case?
Well, I mean, if it came to be that companies like Novavax or companies like AstraZeneca submitted their products, their
Hey, Mary Bruce with just one of those bridges over her shoulder tonight. Mary, thank you. Former President Trump now weighing in tonight after reports that Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz allegedly lobbied the Trump White House for a blanket pardon for himself during the final months of the Trump administration. Here tonight, our chief Washington correspondent, Jonathan Carl.
Today, Donald Trump broke his silence on the investigation into whether one of his most fervent supporters in Congress had a sexual relationship with a 17-year-old girl. Congressman Matt Gaetz has never asked me for a pardon, Trump said in a written statement. It must also be remembered that he has totally denied the accusations against him. Gaetz may never have directly asked Trump for a pardon, but multiple former Trump administration officials tell ABC News that the now embattled congressman had urged the Trump White House to grant blanket preemptive pardons for Trump's political allies, including Gaetz himself. Gaetz had even talked about the idea publicly.
He should pardon everyone from himself to his administration officials to Joe Exotic. I think that the president ought to wield that pardon power effectively and robustly.
Sources familiar with the alleged request tell ABC the idea was quickly dismissed inside the White House. In a statement today, a Gaetz spokesperson said the congressman's public calls for mass pardons had nothing to do with the, quote, false and increasingly bizarre partisan allegations against him. The Department of Justice.
So that is actually an announcement made by the vice president's team earlier today.
This is absolutely an issue that she remains committed to, is in the lead on. The Northern Triangle, which I'm sure you're aware of, but is not the same as the border. They're all related to each other, but addressing being responsible and in the lead on the Northern Triangle is working with these countries in the region, addressing the root causes, working with them on how we can address issues like long-term food insecurity, drought, the COVID-19 pandemic, hurricanes, etc. That's what she's focused on. I don't have an update on when she'll travel.
Chewables for powerful allergy relief plus a... So, is this crowd or bystanders a distraction to Officer Chauvin and others? Let's bring back our expert panel. Joey Jackson, let's be clear. All along you've said you do not think, and I'm using your words, that this dog will hunt, that this is a good argument. But you got to give the defense credit in a sense. Some of these experts have said, yeah, you've got to take this into account, correct?
Yes, but there's a distinction, Mike, between taking something into account and evaluating your surrounding circumstances and, on one hand, and being so preoccupied because the crowd represents a danger, a threat, on the other. Do you see any bats? Do you see any rocks? Do you see any bottles? Do you see anything else? You see a smattering of people. They seem to be concerned more than they seem to be otherwise aggressive or belligerent. They're pleading to help. And if you're so overly concerned, how about you do this? How about you just pick them up off the floor, that is George Floyd, and you take them out of there? And so I just don't understand how this crowd is you're so preoccupied that you have to leave your knee on the neck. You have to, when he's in compliance and in control, continue to pay in compliance. I don't get it. It just doesn't do it for me, and I think it's a fail on the issue of the crowd.
Right. Hey, guys, can we show that again? Can we show the crowd as I'm going to... Bob, when you listen, numbers-wise, what do we got, 12 people here? So, is it really a threat? But I will say, you've had experts, kind of bolster up the defense argument on this.
Mike, you even had the EMT police officer yesterday that testified out of nowhere that this could be at any moment somebody could lunge at you. They don't have to have a weapon. It can be a concealed weapon, and that they are trained, just like the use of force expert today. He used the word in a situation like the Floyd situation, because that's what the defense attorney was asking him. You have to be prepared for the potential of deadly assault at any moment. I mean, these are the government's witnesses. The defense hasn't even put its use of force experts on. He's getting this out of the state's witnesses.
Darren Porcher, you're a law enforcement expert. How do you quantify this crowd or bystanders?
From a police perspective, you do what we refer to as a threat assessment of the crowd. Is this a violent crowd, or that they have the potential to cause harm to yourself or other people? And based on that threat assessment, we don't see an instance where this crowd is moving towards the officers in an aggressive manner. The crowd seems as if they're more upset with the actions of the officers. However, they're not taking action, or I should say aggressive action, against the officers. Therefore, we refer to what this crowd is, and look at this as merely a group of people that are concerned citizens and nothing else.
Darren,
Granted, we hear some...
Real quick, I think you were going to hit my question. You're getting name called, cussed out a little bit. How does that impact things?
Right, granted, we hear some inappropriate language that's being fueled towards the officers, but it's merely language and nothing else. We don't hear violent behavior that's being projected from the crowd. And that's what the standard is in terms of a threat assessment when you analyze a crowd from a police perspective. Therefore, we do not have an element or an aspect of danger attributed to this group of people.
Got it. All right, next up, I think we all wonder, how is the graphic, emotional video, the disturbing video that's so hard to watch, how's that impacting the jury? Because one point is that, are they heartbroken, or are you showing it so much they're becoming desensitized? We'll talk about it with a jury expert coming up.
I'm not. Make it very easy. But happening. It's either we can reach many more people with a lot of
diabetes or diabetic ketoacidosis. Don't take Rybelsus.
Defendants has flipped against the far-right pro-Trump group, the Proud Boys. That's according to an attorney involved in the case who did not reveal the name of the person who flipped. This could go a long way toward building conspiracy cases against Proud Boys associates, and it comes, as Wolf mentioned, as former President Trump deals with more fallout from the attack. The former president under more legal and public pressure tonight for his words and actions preceding the January 6th attack on the Capitol.
We fight like hell, and if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore.
10 members of Congress who were in the House gallery as rioters stormed the Capitol are adding their names to a lawsuit already filed against Donald Trump and his former attorney, Rudy Giuliani.
My congressional duties.
That lawsuit was first brought by Democratic Congressman Benny Thompson and the NAACP, accusing Trump and Giuliani of conspiring with the extremist groups the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers to incite the riot. Those Congress members joining the lawsuit are now telling personal stories of their fear and anxiety that day as they narrowly escaped the mob. Quote, as I sat in my office on January 6th with rioters roaming the hallways, I feared for my life and thought I was going to die, said Democratic Congressman Steve Cohen, who also reveals in the suit that he sat in his office with the lights out, clutching a baseball bat for 2 or 3 hours that day.
The personal narratives add a human dimension to this.
A Trump spokesman has denied that the former president incited the mob on January 6th. What are the Congress members' chances of winning the suit?
There's an argument that given the pre-planning by groups like the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, that they conspired to try to overthrow the government or impede members of Congress as they sought to exercise their constitutional obligations. But it's a different thing to try to lump in President Trump or Rudy Giuliani with that group.
This comes as former House Speaker John Boehner, a fellow Republican, is blistering Trump over the riot. In excerpts from Boehner's forthcoming book obtained by the New York Times, Boehner says Trump, quote, incited that bloody insurrection for nothing more than selfish reasons, perpetuated by the bullshit he'd been shoveling since he lost a fair election the previous November. A similar refrain from retired Lieutenant General Russell Honore, who led the independent probe of Capitol security after the riot. He didn't mention Trump by name, but referred to the misinformation given to people who later stormed the Capitol.
Just tell them a little BS about what they want to hear, a sliver of truth, and have them act on it.
Misinformation, which monitors of extremist groups say still poses a threat.
Because it's been viewed so many times and it continues to be shown, there are groups of individuals who will use that information in order to delegitimize the current president as well as any actions that are taken, but also to legitimize any actions they may take.
A Trump spokesman responded to John Boehner's criticism not by addressing that topic at all, but by calling Boehner a, quote, swamp creature and suggesting that Boehner's criticism was motivated by his own business ties to China. Wolf?
You know, there's a new video of Noah Green, the man who killed the Capitol police officer last week, injured another, shopping for a knife just before the attack. What are you learning, Brian?
Right, well, CNN has obtained surveillance video from that store where Noah Green purchased the knife. That store is called District Cutlery. The owner tells CNN that Green entered his shop at about 11:06 a.m. on Friday, left at 11:28 a.m., about an hour and a half before the attack. He's shown looking at knives and asking if he can touch one, then he buys one for about $300.
Brian Todd reporting for us. Thank you very much, and more news right after this.
And to get you there soon.
Increase your risk of thrush, pneumonia, and osteoporosis. Call your doctor if worsened breathing.
Are you kidding me?
Antibacterial or...
Grab a seat, man. I don't believe me, bro. I'm not the kind of guy. I'm not the kind of guy, man. Take a seat. Y'all, I'm gonna die here. I'm gonna die, man.
By the time that this case gets to closing arguments, the prosecution will have numbed this jury with all the witnesses and all this replaying of the video over and over again. I mean, just one witness after another. That's what's going to happen. This jury is going to become numb to what they see.
You heard there from one of our panelists, Vinu Varghese, warning the prosecution that the jury could become numb to this graphic body camera footage that's so difficult to watch. Is that true? Let's bring in trial consultant and a jury specialist. I mean, he knows juries. He's worked on high-profile cases, O.J. Simpson, Casey Anthony, and so on. Richard Gabriel, good to see you again. So let's get your take. Is there, based on your experience, is there any danger you can desensitize a jury?
Well, of course, and the desensitization will happen. It's inevitable on a trial like this. You have to show the video again and again and again. It's a thing that the prosecution and the defense both know is going to happen. What's interesting about what happened last week, though, is, early on in these trials, it's about sort of the battle of which is the jury going to look at it from which perspective? Is it going to be from Officer Chauvin's perspective in terms of the imminent threat, or is it going to be from basically the bystanders? And what happened last week is they had all of these bystanders who were talking about what they saw there. So they want the jury to actually sit in their shoes. So the emotional impact is not going to come just from the video. It's going to come from the people that are there. And that comes early in the trial, which optimizes the primacy effect in terms of, do they get that jury anchored in from the bystander perspective, from their emotional perspective, watching the knee on the neck or the back of George Floyd. So I think the desensitization is inevitable. The question there is because, which is the jury going to see? Are they going to look at this more from a clinical perspective, from the experts, or are they going to look at it from an emotional perspective?
I believe we have another portion of the video, and a warning ahead of time is always difficult to watch. And it's George Floyd saying, "I can't breathe." And we know he said it roughly 24 times. So we'll watch just a little piece of this here. And again, we warn you as the viewer, it's disturbing, but it's part of the case. How's it impacting the jury? Let's watch and get Richard's take coming out.
Warm up on the front couches. Warm up. Warm up. Warm up. Let's go to All right. Oh my God. I can't believe it, man.
Richard, I got to say, the first time I watched this straight through very early in the trial, your heart breaks for George Floyd. These are the final moments of his life. To that point, from what we've seen from Derek Chauvin, he's not a sympathetic figure at this point. Are you advising his defense team, you better humanize him at some point?
Well, it becomes the big question here. Does he testify? How do you humanize Derek Chauvin? Because he has been sort of demonized, and he looks very uncaring in this, and he's spending a long time on the back and the neck of George Floyd. So the question is, how do you humanize him without him actually testifying about his perspective of some imminent threat and why he felt like he had to stay there for such a long period of time? And I think without his testimony, it's going to be very hard for them to say, yeah, here's his perspective on this. That's what you need in this trial from a defense perspective. Otherwise, it is very difficult. How do you get his perspective into this trial without him testifying?
You make such a good point. As we've gone on, more and more of our experts, yourself included, say, now he has to testify.
Media Group, KELO News at...
Stacy says he also was funny, intelligent, and always very humble. May they rest in peace, and may their memories be a blessing. Thanks very much for watching. I'm Will Flitzer in the Situation Room.
Tonight, the cause of the crash that seriously injured golf legend Tiger Woods revealed. The sheriff saying Woods was speeding up to 87 miles an hour, nearly double the limit when he crashed his SUV. The critical 7 seconds of data from the vehicle's black box, what it shows, and the mistake investigators believe Woods made in panic. Why Woods won't face charges. The new CDC alert, the UK variant, believed to be deadlier than earlier strains, now dominant in the U.S. New cases rising in half the country. CDC teams in Michigan facing a 104% spike in 2 weeks. And new caution on AstraZeneca's vaccine. The LAPD expert testifying Derek Chauvin used deadly force on George Floyd, and the courtroom debate over body cam video. What can Floyd be heard saying on it? President Biden unveiling a plan to raise taxes on corporations to pay for his $2 trillion infrastructure plan, and new reporting how he plans to go it alone on gun control. The unintended fallout from the MLB moving the All-Star game out of Atlanta on local businesses, and why beloved animal expert Jack Hanna is stepping away from the spotlight.
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
Good evening, everyone. The curious case of the crash that nearly took the life of golf great Tiger Woods back in February is closed tonight with a simple explanation. He was driving too fast.
That again happened today when the defense cross-examined that use of force expert, arguing Floyd was resisting arrest.
because at the time of the restraint period, Mr. Floyd was not resisting. He was in the prone position. He was handcuffed. He was not attempting to evade. He was not attempting to resist. And the pressure that was being caused by the body weight could cause positional asphyxia, which could cause death.
Meantime, Chauvin's defense may face another challenge they wouldn't normally have to think about: Chauvin's face mask. It hides his reaction during testimony, and legal experts say that can make a difference to jurors, allowing Chauvin's impassive expression at the scene to become the enduring image throughout this trial.
West River, a man who opened fire on a home in Pine Ridge, killing someone inside, has now been sentenced to 35 years in prison. Ricky Bagola previously pled guilty to second-degree murder in the January 2020 death of Casey Weston. Prosecutors say Bagola blindly fired 7 rounds into a house in a dispute over methamphetamine. 2 of the rounds hit Weston. Court documents made no mention of Weston being involved in the drug dispute. Weston was the father of 4 children.
If you look at the term white supremacist, for example, I think this is something that many would agree has been clearly established as, you know, the philosophy of the KKK and Nazis, as people who believe, hey, the white race is superior and therefore must have power and control over all other races. But we live in a world now where we have people in power who say, if you're white, you're a white supremacist whether you know it or not. If you're white, you're a racist whether you know it or not. And if you follow that approach, that means that any white person in America could be the target of surveillance. If you look at, okay, well, what is domestic extremism? Is being extremely patriotic being a domestic extremist? You know, if you look at our service members and our veterans who have been targeted and pointed out by those in our government as being vulnerable to being domestic extremists, well, I've served with incredible great patriots as a veteran and soldier myself, people who are willing to lay their lives down and die for this great country that we love. Is this who they're talking about when they're saying that we need to look out for domestic extremists? It's absolutely outrageous, and it's offensive. It's offensive to those who I've served with, including those who have paid the ultimate price and given their lives in service to our country.
Enforcement officer, you faced crowds, right? And can a crowd impact whether or not you're allowed to use deadly force on somebody that you're holding?
Well, it's a good question, Joy. Thank you for having me. So a crowd can only impact that use of deadly force if for some reason that crowd is perceived to be a threat. Now, I will say that, if you have an issue with people cursing at you and yelling at you, then the police department is no place for you to be employed, because this is something that people do. And we have something called the First Amendment in this country. And this is a country where folks can express themselves and express their thoughts and so forth with government. That's a big difference between perceiving a crowd as a threat, a group of people as a threat. And I'll just go a step further, that if that crowd was not a crowd of predominantly African-American people, this argument would not pass the lab test, right? So we see crowds of people all the time engaged in all types of activities, but it's a narrative here that for some reason, this crowd was a threat. And let's go a step further. If you perceive them a threat, well, perhaps it's because you were engaged in the act of snuffing the life out of someone in front of them. So there are just so much irony here with regards to the defense's approach to this crowd.
Absolutely, and I apologize, I mispronounced your last name, Mr. Burkhalter. Thank you very much. Appreciate those points that you're making. And Paul, we have seen crowds of white armed citizens, barraging into state houses, wielding AR-15s, and because they're mad about having to wear masks. We've seen people who are pro open carry wielding AR-15s, walking down the street, yelling at police, telling them you don't have the right to disarm me. Like, we've seen people get in the faces of police. Those people don't get shot. Those people don't get held to the ground and choked out. So that argument seems to me to be pretty ludicrous. But I want to point you toward, you can comment on that, but there was, I thought, an even more absurd argument made by Mr. Nelson today. And that is that he's trying to claim that George Floyd, while being held down in the car, said, I ate too many drugs, which strikes me as something that no one has ever said ever in life, rather than, I ain't done no drugs, which is what you can hear him say. Your thoughts on that?
So first, the problem with the defense argument about the crowd is that last week the jury met the people in the crowd. The brave teenage girl who made the video, the EMT first responder who begged Chauvin to let her take Mr. Floyd's pulse, Charles McMillan, the older gentleman who broke down in sobs because he couldn't save Mr. Floyd's life. The crowd doesn't look like a vicious, angry mob. The jury might think the people in the crowd dealt with Mr. Floyd more responsibly than Chauvin did. And unfortunately, the prosecutor has to respond to the argument that Mr. Floyd died of a drug overdose, and this is just the beginning of a long, dirty pathway. So next week, the defense has its own videotape from an arrest of Mr. Floyd in 2019. It starts out like his encounter with Chauvin. Cops approach the car, they take out their gun, and Mr. Floyd then appears to swallow some pills. And that time, the cops took him to the hospital. So the defense wants the jury to think that Mr. Floyd did the same thing when Chauvin arrested him, but this time, when he swallowed the pills, they killed him.
Here's the problem with that, in my mind, and you are the expert, sir, so I'm going to ask you, Mr. Burkhalter, if in fact George Floyd swallowed some pills in the back of the squad car and was in the process of having a drug overdose that the officers deemed could be fatal, would the appropriate law enforcement response be to sit on him for 9 minutes while he died, rather than use the Narcan that we keep hearing about and trying to stop the drug overdose, or otherwise trying to save his life? Because staying on top of him and putting 3 people's full body weight on him does not seem like the appropriate law enforcement response to a drug overdose, even if you think that's what's happening.
That is absolutely correct. So.
And did you then, well, just describe for the jury where those generally were located in the squad car?
They were all on the rear passenger side of the vehicle.
And still to come, Jody Stiger, the prosecution's use of force expert, taking the stand, testifying the force used on George Floyd was lethal. Stay with us.
Or fertility, and I think that's the biggest question.
Dr. Kura also says some younger people believe that because of their age, they are healthy and do not need the vaccine.
Young people have health in their favor, but you can ruin it by getting COVID-19. And we know the long haul syndrome, where people get long-term effects. If you want to preserve the health that you enjoy today, it's very important that you go register and get your vaccination. It's a shot to save lives.
In Rapid City, Sydney Thorson, KELO News. Monument Health reminds everyone we need about 80% of the population to be vaccinated to reach herd immunity. According to the state health department, more than 32% of South Dakotans have completed their vaccinations.
There are now 2 groups working to get Medicaid expansion on the 2022 ballot. According to the South Dakota Secretary of State, people can now collect signatures for 4 possible ballot questions. 3 of them deal with Medicaid expansion. Every state surrounding South Dakota except Wyoming has passed Medicaid expansion.
We are confounded by this opposition, and the only thing you can really point to is that there's this philosophical opposition to the Affordable Care Act, to government being involved in health care.
Digital reporter Eric Mayer looks at the issue and the steps possible ballot questions must take in a KELOLAND.com original.
Also,
has come out and placed the blame solely on President Trump, writing the Republican Party has been taken over by whack jobs, okay? Now, let me just give you a statistic here that I don't know if a lot of people saw today. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene says her re-election campaign has raised $3.2 million in her first 3 months of office. Right? She's embraced conspiracy theories, indicated support for executing prominent Democratic politicians, was even removed from her committees. This is, just to be clear, $3.2 million is more than 4 times what the far left-wing star AOC raised in her first 3 months. So Matthew, when you look at that, does money talk? Does it tell you everything you need to know about where the power center in quotes, is for the GOP?
Well, I think money, and it's not like, and money represents where the base of the party is. And I think it's the idea that there's these establishment Republicans pointing out, like in some way, that there's these whack jobs that don't represent the Republican Party. They represent the Republican Party as it stands today. That's who the Republican Party is. Marjorie Taylor Greene, my guess is far more popular in the National Republican Party, if you did a poll, than Boehner is. That's where the Republican Party is. It's not just a pocket of people and a few here and a few there. It is the base of the Republican Party. And I want to take up something else that Kathleen, add on to something Kathleen said, yes, which is this isn't the first time where a lie has been produced in the aftermath of something we all saw within our own eyes, in the aftermath of this, and that it's somehow being spun into some mythic status that we all know with our own eyes and ears happened. It happened after the Civil War. We all know what happened what the Civil War was about. It was about slavery. It was about reuniting the country and abolishing slavery. But what happened after the Civil War? The same elements that are rooted in this same thing started their own narrative, which was this lost cause narrative that it wasn't about slavery, it was about states' rights, it was about Southern traditions, and that narrative played out for more than 100 years. That narrative surfaced again in the midst of civil rights. And so it's not the first time. What I think Republicans who still care, have to understand the days of pointing out and say those people don't represent it. That's the Republican Party. And I would put some of this on Boehner. This didn't start in 2016. This started long before Donald Trump showed up on the scene, and Boehner did nothing about it as it grew.
And let me ask you about that, Kathleen, because you got Boehner coming out now, right? Whatever Trump was shoveling this load of BS, right? Well, it comes out now. Was this fringe takeover of the Republican Party inevitable, sort of that we could have seen it happening from the beginning of the Tea Party? Or could someone like Boehner have actually made a difference if he had spoken out sooner?
Black businesses. Now, for many, this is another crushing blow.
It's unfortunate to know that those who may be hurt by the legislation would also continue to be hurt by us not supporting our economy here.
Brian Loop, who owns a restaurant near downtown Atlanta, is worried about the lasting impact.
It's a trickle-down effect. We're just trying to get back to a normal sense of business here.
Blaine, you also have an update about that state lawmaker arrested when that voting bill was signed.
That's right, Lester. Representative Park Cannon was arrested and taken out of the Capitol when she knocked on the governor's door as he was signing that bill. Today, the DA announced that she is not pursuing any charges and just closing the case. Lester.
All right, Blaine, thank you. Here in New York, a district attorney has asked the court to dismiss nearly 100 drug convictions after an NYPD detective was accused of lying. Here's Stephanie Gusk.
Tonight in Brooklyn, dozens of drug convictions tossed out and more likely to come. All 90 of the cases involving one narcotics detective, Joseph Franco.
I can no longer stand by Detective Franco's work. I have lost confidence in his reliability.
Franco pleaded not guilty in 2019 to more than a dozen charges, including perjury for his work on 4 drug cases. One in April 2018. Franco said he witnessed a deal go down in this Manhattan building. But according to the indictment, security video showed no drug sale in the lobby. And
strict standards. Go to meet the facts.
I want to walk you through some of what's in that plan. $400 billion is dedicated to in-home care for older and disabled Americans. The White House says this is going to raise wages of those workers who work in those homes and who are predominantly low-paid women, often women of color. There's $100 billion to expand broadband. The White House said this will disproportionately help Black and Latino families who have less access to affordable broadband than white families. There's $45 billion to eliminate all lead pipes and service lines in our drinking water systems. That, the White House says, will impact children and specifically children of color. And then there's $20 billion to invest in communities historically hurt by infrastructure plans. That's communities, African-American communities in places like New Orleans and Syracuse that in the past had highways and other infrastructure plans built through their neighborhoods that were then, that then led to Black-owned businesses and playgrounds and all sorts of economic hurt to those neighborhoods. So those are just some of the things that the plan is doing specifically targeted to communities of color.
And Yamiche, how does the president make the case that racial justice is part of infrastructure?
Well, all of this, Judy, President Trump all of the shooting, President Biden says, is really targeted at racial equality. He says the access to clean water, lead pipes being eliminated. He says the ability to have a living wage, as well as having access to broadband, which of course is key in a society now that is relying more and more on internet. All of this is really about how people survive and thrive in America. He says that has to be part of what we consider to be infrastructure. He said the idea of infrastructure has been evolving for generations, and he said this should be another generation that evolves that. He says part of this really is about making sure that families can have a new generation of Americans who can look at their lives and say there is dignity to work, there is living wage, there is a way to survive in this country. I pressed the White House on that. They also said that this is a jobs plan, and that we should be thinking about it not just as infrastructure, but as really how we're impacting people's lives across the country, related not just to infrastructure, but to the way that they can survive.
So many parts to this complex, big and complex infrastructure plan that the president's proposed, and we're trying to look at each part of it. Yamiche Alcindor, thank you.
Thanks so much.
To stop circulating virus, to stop the emergence of variants, to stop hospitalizations, and ultimately to stop deaths. I'm really encouraged by these decreased numbers of deaths that I believe to be an impact of vaccination, especially the vaccination of our elderly communities. But I think we're way too high to be thinking that we've won this race.
Overwhelmingly white town, whatever, but these stories mean something. Beijing now has more billionaires than New York City.
Officials to Joe Exotic if he has to, because you see from the radical left a bloodlust that will only be quenched if they come after the people who worked so hard to animate the Trump administration. So I think that the president ought to wield that pardon power effectively and robustly.
Do this, how do I react, ultimately with the goal of keeping everybody safe, right?
Yes, that's a pretty standard thing to continually reassess as you are using force.
Right. Reassessment is a specific tool.
Yes.
And that's common to police officers, right?
Yes, sir.
Hear what he said?
No, I couldn't make it out.
Does it sound like he says, I ate too many drugs? Listen again.
I can't make that out, no.
So in the chaos of a situation, things can be missed, right?
Yes.
Sir, you were shown some training materials that included photographs of officers in positions in which they would have their legs on the subject's back and base of the neck. Is that right?
Yes.
And in the photograph you were shown, that subject was not yet handcuffed, was he?
No, he was not.
And the purpose of situating oneself on a subject is to gain control in order to handcuff the individual.
Yes.
And what is the officer supposed to do after they handcuff the individual?
Immediately sit the person up or put him on the side recovery position.
Still to come, the officer's body cam footage front and center in the courtroom as the lead investigator in the case breaks down the timeline. You'll also hear about his testimony about whether Derek Chauvin's knee appears to be on George Floyd's back or on his neck.
Take the crown. Visit.
That's what it hurts. My knee hurts. Everything hurts. There's water or something. Please. Please. I can't breathe, officer.
Stiger testified about the medical complication he learned of as an officer himself when putting pressure on someone's body who's lying on their stomach.
How long have the dangers of positional asphyxia been known?
At least 20 years.
He also testified that body camera video showed Chauvin using pain compliance even after Floyd stopped resisting.
Pain compliance is a technique that officers use to get a subject to comply with their commands.
In cross-examination, Chauvin's attorney questioned Stiger's expertise.
Have you ever previously testified in any court or in any state or in federal court as an expert on the police use of force?
No, I haven't.
Check this box!
Now, Eric Nelson argued the crowd was distracting Chauvin. He brought in the issue of Floyd's drug use, intimating he took drugs during the arrest.
I'm sorry. Let me see your other hand.
Does it sound like he said, I ate too many drugs? Listen again.
I can't make that out, no.
The next state witness, Special Agent James Rayerson, who investigated Floyd's death. At first, he agreed with Nelson.
Did it appear that Mr. Floyd said, I ate too many drugs?
Yes, it did.
But when asked again by prosecutors, disputed Nelson's interpretation.
I believe Mr. Floyd was saying, I ain't doing no drugs.
A BCA forensic scientist testified she tested a pill found in the squad car weeks after Floyd was pulled from it.
The swab collected from that pill, I obtained a single source male DNA profile that matches George Floyd.
Now, the defense made a point of questioning several of the witnesses about those pills that were found inside not only the squad car, but also inside the SUV where George Floyd was first taken from. And we heard from a chemist that tested some of those pills, and she said that there were levels of fentanyl in some of the pills and levels of methamphetamine, though she said the levels of fentanyl were low in some of those pills and the methamphetamine as well.
All right, Sarah, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And I want to go straight to Tony Romanucci, as promised, one of the attorneys for the Floyd family. And Tony, I appreciate your coming on again. So the defense arguing today that when Floyd first yelled out, I can't breathe, that it was a form of resisting arrest, right? So the suggestion was that this is just something people do and people say to bargain with officers to let them go. What was your reaction when you heard that argument?
Well, and that's all it is. It's an argument. It doesn't take away from the fact that the use of force here was excessive and it turned out to be deadly. Whether or not George was trying to get out of the situation he was in doesn't take away from the fact that Derek Chauvin kneeled on his neck for such a period of time as to cause his death. We know that he died from positional asphyxia. Everything else, including the drug use, that's just a defense. That's just something, a distraction in order for us to take the jury's attention away from what happened here.
Which I think it's significant how you answered that question and how you walk that line. I wonder what it'll mean for the jury. I mean, today we heard prosecutors directly address another point, Tony, that the defense has been making repeatedly, right? And you've seen this, right? This whole question about Chauvin's knee, right? That they've been trying to move it at different times, right? That maybe it was on his shoulder blade when the ambulance arrived, not his neck. And maybe at another point it was on his shoulder blade, not exactly on his neck. So here's what they said today.
Is the risk related to the pressure on the neck or the pressure on the body?
The pressure on the body, any additional pressure on the body complicates breathing more so than if there was no pressure at all.
And so the placement of the knees, even if there can be shifting between the neck, the base of the neck, the point is that both of the defendant's knees were on Mr. Floyd's body during the entirety of the restraint period. Is that right?
Yes.
So Tony, that was the prosecution, right? And it you know, I'm not a lawyer, but what that sounds like they're trying to say is maybe admitting that the jury may have questions about Chauvin's knee not being on the neck the whole time, and they're trying to make the point, well, if it wasn't on there the whole time, it doesn't matter because this is still how he died. Why do you think they felt that they needed to do that? Did they do a good job? Do you think that that indicates there could be a fog on this crucial question with the jury? How do you interpret this?
I think we need to interpret it in totality here. If you look at the testimony from Friday into Monday, it really was watershed testimony in policing in America, I think, because you had police officers from within the department in which the officer is being accused of saying that the use of force was never trained that way, it wouldn't have been tolerated, and that it certainly was excessive and could cause death. So when you look at that testimony, the jury should look beyond any of these other distractions and key in on Chief Arredondo, who, like I said, never seen before in this country, and set an example for policing in America on this, cracking the blue line in the code of silence here by coming out and speaking against one of his own officers.
So let me ask you.
The gum seal tight. Down on the deliciousness.
that second job.
Douglas MacArthur is using a hybrid model, dividing its 550 students into 2 groups, which alternate attending classes in person, each for 2 days a week. But families can still choose to remain 100% virtual, making it all the more challenging for teachers to keep a steady work-life balance.
We had to get to know what their tablets look like compared to what we see.
Ashley Hanowski teaches 1st grade at Douglas MacArthur.
Everything that we would do normally in a classroom, as far as like setting up routines or even having projects for the kids to do, we had to switch it now for everything on the computer. I come here early in the morning and I get my computer set up, and I do have a family at home with 2 little ones, so when they go to bed, I am up on my computer working after hours just to make sure my lessons are accurate and engaging for my students for the next day.
Longer hours are just one way the pandemic has taken a toll on America's teachers.
Factor in determining state-by-state allocation is still population. And I guess if, given what's going on in Michigan and the fact that there's, at this point, frankly, excess supply, it seems like, in other states, if not now, is there a time when you would consider tweaking that formula or even targeting specifically the J&J vaccines, just really any change in approach to respond to the urgency of the situation there?
Yeah, thanks for the question.
Harris, we lose a lot of time. I mean, I wish you good luck with the book, and I'll enjoy reading it, but you're not being too blasé and just writing off the last 4 years, and we'll pick up some serious geopolitical talk in 4 years' time.
Well, first of all, we're sort of thinking about whether we should call it Beyond Biden and Harris, because we're not totally convinced that Biden will make all 4 years. But putting that to one side, look,
And Michael, now that we do have this new information that there's now sort of added potential criminality, and we should say again, he's denying it, but there is this new story out there. Can you just give us a specific on whether or not this request for a pardon, was it formal or was it informal? Was it a formal request to White House officials, or was it an informal, this is something that I need?
Stops verbalizing.
Yes.
We're saying words.
Yes, sir.
And that approximately, well, if we could then go to 2023-59. All right, so we're at 23:58, and I ask that you play this for about 10 seconds again.
Bro, but you can get him off the ground. They're being a bum right now. You can get him off the ground, bro. You can get him off the ground. You're being a bum right now.
All right, so is this the moment in the encounter between Mr. Floyd and Mr. Chauvin when Mr. Floyd appears to stop making verbal sounds, talking?
Yes, sir.
Now, prior to coming to court, did you have an opportunity to look at defense exhibits 1045, 46, 47, and 48?
Yes, sir.
I'm going to ask that exhibit 1045 be placed on screen, please. And can you note for the jurors the timestamp in this exhibit?
2022.
And so approximately how long after Mr. Floyd was put on the prone position on the ground did this occur? Would it help to refresh your recollection to refer to a note? Sure.
He was placed on the ground at 2019-18. Yeah, so 4 minutes.
More than 4 minutes?
More than 4 minutes, yes, sir.
And then going back to Exhibit 127, is there a point in time on Darnell Fraser's Facebook video when it appears that Mr. Floyd no longer makes any movements?
Yes, sir.
And coming up, a huge moment and a huge debate that followed. Did George Floyd say, "I ate too many drugs" or "I ain't do no drugs"? We'll talk about it.
From the bottom of my heart, I'm sorry. For me, it's about trust. Our source says,
recovery assisting.
At some point in May or June. The pandemic hit just as last year's college seniors were ready to graduate, causing a loss of job opportunities.
But now, with a year gone by, those opportunities are starting to return. Cooper Seamer has the story from our Aberdeen newsroom.
Last spring was a time of uncertainty for many, and for college students looking to get their first job out of school, the loss of opportunities was sudden as many employers stopped hiring.
One of our first instincts was, of course, to reach out to seniors to say, what do you still need help with? And the other side of that was to talk to our employers.
Now, over a year later, job fairs are being held at Northern State again. Lorenz says it's amazing to think of how much has changed for students and employers looking to connect, and hopefully having in-person fairs again will present more opportunities.
So much hiring has taken place virtually over the last year, but there are certain places that I think still really want to connect with candidates face-to-face.
One of those students at the fair today was Cade Larson. The Northern State senior says he saw many of his friends last year struggle finding jobs after graduation, and he had trouble himself looking for an internship.
Last summer I was looking for an internship, and it was really weird because, things weren't on site or anything like that.
Larson says he's glad that job fairs have returned to campus, saying that while it's been necessary to do a lot online the past year, he still prefers connecting in person and learning more about different options that way.
I'm a big in-person kind of talker, I guess. I've been living on Zoom just like many people for the past year now, so it's awesome to see different employers in person.
Lorenz says that it's still a much different landscape today for job seekers than it was before the onset of the pandemic, and says that career services have been stressing to students to be open to many different options that they wouldn't have previously considered.
I think college students right now should really be prepared for anything. The world of work looks differently than it did a year ago, and it'll probably look different a year from now as well.
For 4 months now, this classroom, which they share with 5 other families, is what they have been forced to call home.
I fled here with 5 of my children. Others fled to Sudan. This is troubling me a lot. Since we arrived here, we have had so many problems.
People like Kindafi are trying to outrun a conflict spreading through Ethiopia's north. The region's powerful political party, representing the Tigrayan ethnic group, used to lead the Ethiopian government, but they clashed with current Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. The Tigray party retrenched in their home region, defying Abiy by holding regional elections. In response, Ethiopian government troops arrived in the north, aided by neighboring Eritrea. Fighting here has led to accusations that the government and Eritrean troops are committing human rights abuses against civilians. After months of denials, Ethiopia's Prime Minister has admitted
aspirations of the American people and their needs. And it's evolving again today. We need to start seeing infrastructure through its effect on the lives of working people in America. What is the foundation today that they need to carve out their place in the middle class, to make it, to live, to go to work, to raise their families with dignity, to ensure that good jobs will be there for their kids, no matter who they are or what zip code they live in? That's what infrastructure means in the 21st century. It still depends on roads and bridges, ports and airports, rail and mass transit. But it also depends on having reliable, high-speed internet in every home. Because today's high-speed internet is infrastructure. It depends on the electric grid, a grid that won't collapse in a winter storm or be compromised by hackers at home or abroad. It depends on investing in made-in-America goods from every American community, including those that have historically been left out: Black, Latino, Asian American, Native Americans, rural communities. Talk to folks around the country about what really makes up the foundation of a good economy. Ask a teacher or a child care worker if having clean drinking water, non-contaminated drinking water in our schools and our child care centers is part of that foundation. When we know that the lead in our pipes slows a child's development when they drink that water. Ask the entrepreneur whose small business was destroyed by the second 100-year flood in the last 10 years in Iowa. Or wildfires in the West that burned 5 million acres last year, an area roughly the size of the entire state of New Jersey. More fires than ever. Or the devastating damage, seen more frequent and more intense hurricanes and storms on the east and Gulf coasts. Ask all those farmers and small business owners and homeowners whether investing in clean energy to fight the effects of climate change is part of infrastructure. Ask folks in rural America, where more than 35% of the people lack a reliable high-speed internet, limiting their ability to conduct business or engage in remote learning for their schools. Ask them whether investing in internet access will lead to better jobs in town, new markets for farmers, and better opportunities for their kids. And I'm serious about this. Ask the moms and dads in the sandwich generation, the folks carrying enormous personal and financial strains trying to raise their children and care for their parents, their elderly parents, or members of their families with a disability. Ask them.
Can wear every single day, because this is exactly what.
How does this happen though? Because we've had basically kids have been home all through 2020, so they've lost a year. We all know the online learning is a joke. Now they're coming back having lost a year, fallen behind, and under cover of COVID, these guys have introduced all this transformational equity rubbish. But why does it happen? Is it because the superintendent's just a shill for the teachers' unions, or because your board colleagues don't have the stomach for resisting the superintendent? How does it happen?
Well, honestly, in my opinion, I think that one of the members of the board is the ringleader, but I also think the superintendent is kind of the ringleader. It seems like one of these companies that comes in and does the training maybe, set these people up with the documents, etc. So they kind of hit it.
For all, tackling climate change.
Into the narrative of the defense that I ate too many drugs, and in fact we know